Thank you very much, Commissioner, for joining us to talk about the Consumer Empowerment Project. As you know, my name is Katrina Sickle because we did meet earlier this year at the Consumer Summit, so a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much, and hello to everyone. Hello to you, Katrina, and I'm very pleased to be with you today to launch the Consumer Empowerment Project. Indeed, I can only be delighted to see the development of new initiatives in the field of consumer protection.
So we're going to talk a little bit about this initiative. Now, as you well know, it is ostensibly about establishing an open dialogue between consumer organisations, civil society and industry on how to better empower consumers. So the obvious first question is, how do you think these kinds of initiatives and perhaps more generally voluntary commitments, those that go beyond the legal obligations, can contribute to providing a safer environment for consumers, particularly in the digital realm?
I firmly believe that we need different tools to fully empower consumers. We need the right legislative environment as a sound basis, strong consumer organizations and civil society. It's very important to work with all, but also the businesses that are willing to go beyond the legal requirements and various public and private actors that are engaged to improve consumer awareness and education. And the new consumer agenda, which captures my vision for consumer policy, also formally recognizes the power of dialogue between industry, consumer organizations and civil society. To give you an example, we have set up the Consumer Policy Advisory Group, and this group meets twice a year to discuss progress and reflect on priorities in the year ahead. We also organized the European Consumer Summit. You were there in Strasbourg for the last one. And every year we organize this to bring all stakeholders together for targeted discussions on the future of consumer policy. And finally, regular consumer dialogues are held in the member states. These are a real opportunity to engage with all stakeholders and with the general public in every member state. I took part in different dialogues at the national level with the minister in charge and with the civil society. And in digital area, the new consumer agenda mentions the importance of cooperation between competent authorities and key stakeholders such as platforms, business associations, advertisers and consumer organizations to fight against consumer scams, deceptive marketing techniques and fraud in online shopping. To put this into practice, we have launched the Product Safety Pledge, where companies can commit themselves in a voluntary manner to increase the safety of products sold online. In 2018, with the previous Commission, it started with 4 online marketplaces: AliExpress, Amazon eBay and Rakuten France. Today, 11 marketplaces are taking part in our Product Safety Pledge. In the last reporting period, 97% of products identified through public recall websites such as EU SafetyGate were removed within 2 working days. This shows the power of voluntary cooperation mechanism, allowing and encouraging companies to go beyond what is required from them by legislation. So it's very important to have a dialogue, but to organize also some voluntary commitments of companies going further than all legislative proposals or all legislative instruments.
Thank you, and you're doing such a splendid job of talking to me live and talking to an audience that is also going to be present at this event, so thank you so very much for that. Let me drill a little bit down into the details and ask, for you to just elaborate on the main steps or actions or support that need to really be taken in order to, I use this word again, empower consumers.
But in all the different fields, the empowerment is very important. And in my view, for consumers to be empowered, they need different things: to understand their rights, to know where to go, to be sure that it's possible to have a real enforcement of their rights. So not just to have an explanation about the rights, but to see and to know where to go to when their rights are violated, to be assured of redress, and we are working also on collective redress, and to be able to make informed consumption choices and be able to make choice in line with their beliefs, regardless of their financial situation. Firstly, I said we need to ensure consumers are aware of their rights. For example, when consumers have an issue with a purchase they made in another country, for example, while traveling or through e-shopping with external platform from another member state or from abroad, the network of European consumer centers, which is co-financed by the European Union and the member states credits, advises consumers on their rights for free. So it's very easy. When necessary, the network ensures that the trader is contacted and encouraged to assist the consumer, facilitating a cross-border amicable settlement. And the center also run effective information campaigns, and most of them serve as contact points, the first contact point in fact, for various EU laws such as the geo-blocking regulation or the service directive, and when amicable solutions are not possible, sometimes it's a reality, an independent third party can help solve the dispute without going into a lengthy and costly civil court process. And you know that it's more efficient to have such a procedure than to go to justice for a very long procedure. And the Commission adopted a directive with common quality and coverage criteria for consumer alternative dispute resolution. I tried to have a better participation of all the member states in such a process. We are now evaluating the need to modernize this framework, notably due to the fast development of online shopping, with increasing sales from traders based outside the Union, from third countries, and an increasing role of digital intermediaries. And in this respect, I would like to encourage all interested parties to contribute to our open public consultation, which is running until end of June. So you have the time to take part. Now, consumers should also have strong tools to enforce their rights when something goes wrong. Just as businesses are entitled to sell products to all consumers in the single market, consumers, in the same way, wherever they are in the EU, should be able to enforce their rights effectively vis-à-vis these businesses. The enforcement of consumer rights is first and foremost the responsibility of national authorities, but the European Union plays an important role and coordinating and supporting role. The Consumer Protection Cooperation, or the CPC, to have the short name, regulation. We have now a real CPC regulation, and the regulation provides a strong basis for joint EU action. It strengthens enforcement authorities. Authorities are now with more capacities to address large-scale infringements of EU consumer law. And it's very important, if we want to enforce the legislation, to have such a capacity to address large-scale infringements law and to ensure a consistent level of consumer protection within the EU and to offer a one-stop shop for businesses. I spoke about making informed decisions as well. A good example of this is climate and the environmental a topic European citizens are concerned about, and you know that there are more and more, certainly in the young generation, interest for that. Citizens are eager to contribute as consumers to achieving climate neutrality, preserving natural resources and biodiversity, and reducing pollution. We know that if given the choice, consumers will often choose the more sustainable option. But it can be difficult for consumers to make such a choice because of the many claims on products from environment friendly to climate neutral or made with recycled materials. It is impossible for consumers to appraise what this means. In such a situation, consumers are not really empowered to make an informed choice about what they want to spend their money on and what kind of company, in fact, and production methods they support. Our proposal, empowering consumers for the green transition, brings or try to bring solutions to this issue. I will come back to it later, but I talk about the financial situation of consumers because I believe it is important that all consumers in the EU can participate in the green and digital transformations. It is not right if this concerns only the most privileged people. The increasing financial vulnerability of many EU households is a concern for me. A survey held in 2020 in 21 member states showed that since the start of the COVID-19 crisis, 6 in 10 consumers have had financial difficulties, which may lead to over-indebtedness or other kind of difficulties. And since then, we have been facing increases of energy and food prices, and certainly with the crisis now in Ukraine, it's more and more the case. With the ongoing revision of the Consumer Credit Directive, we are aiming to provide stronger rules on credit worthiness assessment in order to prevent consumer over indebtedness and to protect the most vulnerable consumers. Now, when we talk about the participation of consumers to the digital transition, vulnerable consumers are not only those with a lower income. Older consumers and consumers with disabilities, to give some examples, are also accessible, are also need for accessible products and are also vulnerable consumers. A fair and non-discriminatory approach to the digital transformation should meet the needs of older consumers, consumers with disabilities, and more generally of liners who may be less familiar or less at ease with digital tools and more prone to be victims of fraud. And to be honest, then we can think of children and minors who are particularly exposed to misleading or aggressive commercial practices online. The risk of discrimination is also made worse by algorithms used by certain goods and services providers. This may lead to discrimination again among consumers generally, but it affects certain groups more than others, of course, and in particular, again, people from minority ethnic or racial backgrounds. Evidence from behavioral economics show that the behaviors of consumers are often affected by cognitive biases, especially online. This can be exploited by traders for commercial purposes. Such new forms of risks can affect virtually all consumers, making all of us vulnerable, because at the end, if you look to our situation online, we are quite all vulnerable consumers. So it's the reason why we are paying attention to some specific categories, but we try also to take into account the difficulty that yourself or myself are confronting with when we are shopping online.
Thank you. And you know, a long and fascinating answer. And I think what your answer shows, because the question was what steps and actions and support need to be taken to empower consumers. And I think with that answer that touched upon bias in AI, on vulnerability, on the importance of redress, so many different areas, I think you have fantastically laid out quite what is behind the notion of that verb empower. There is a lot to think about and a lot of support and a lot of awareness raising too. Let me pick up on, you talked about the importance of engaging the consumer and empowering the consumer in the green transition. So let's look at sustainability, which is one of the goals of the Consumer Empowerment Project. Now, as you know, at the end of March this year, the Commission tabled a new legislative proposal to empower consumers in this green transition. So, in effect, to guarantee that they can obtain all the necessary information to take those environment-friendly choices. In the proposal, there's a clear reference to right to repairability. Now, you said yourself, consumers are interested in choosing the more sustainable option, but it's difficult sometimes for them if they don't have the right information. Do you think the topic right to repairability is one where consumers are well versed, or do you think we need to inform or educate them more so that they really can make the switch from kind of pure consumption to a more recycling culture?
Of course, it's a part of the circular economy, and you know that we need to take all the actors and all the stakeholders, in fact, in the circular economy, but not only the businesses and the companies, but also the consumers. And the proposal that the Commission published in March aims to put consumers at the heart of the green transition. Consumers need to be empowered to make, again, sustainable choices. And this was our commitment in the new consumer agenda and in the circular economy action plan. You have listened about that during the Consumer Summit again in Strasbourg. The Commission has now delivered on this promise. And I will say that the proposal gives consumers stronger rights and better protects them against misleading practices such as greenwashing or early obsolescence, two very important elements which are critical to better. And I'm sure that it's very important to say that there is a huge support in the European Parliament, to give an example, in some years to work on this. Firstly, we believe that consumers have a right to have the information they need to make sustainable choices. Without information, it's impossible to go to the good products. And there is clearly a demand for this. In a recent survey, 86% said that they want better information on how long a product will last. 82% of consumers said that it was difficult to find information on how long a product would last or whether it could be fixed. We propose to add a new consumer right to the Consumer Rights Directives, namely the right to have information on how long a product is guaranteed to last and how a product can be repaired. That's very important, the repairability to guarantee the sustainability. This should be provided before, of course, the consumer buys the product so they can make an educated choice. For example, if you are buying a laptop, the seller of the laptop needs to tell you what sort of producer's guarantee you get. Be it 3 years, 4 years, 5 years or longer. If there's no producer's guarantee, you should be told. In the case of energy-using goods, we also want the seller to provide you with information about how to repair your laptop. And you know that sometimes it's very difficult. This could be information about what spare parts are available from the producer or whether a repair manual is available too. Our proposal will also require that the consumer is informed whenever a product is designed only to function with spare parts provided by the original producer, or is it possible to go to other kind of producers? This will allow consumers to make, again, an informed purchasing choice and favoring those producers who allow third parties, maybe, to manipulate and to manufacture and provide spare parts for their products. Because if you want to repair a product, it's maybe useful to go to other kind of people than the original producer. And secondly, there are currently no EU-wide rules that ban greenwashing in all circumstances and in all conditions. We recently assessed 150 environmental claims for a wide range of products and found that over 50% were vague, misleading or unfounded. So we need to reinforce the information of the consumers, and we are proposing to enshrine this in consumer law with an amendment to the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, extending the list of banned practices. For example, sellers will not be allowed to put a sustainability label on their product if it has not been either certified by a third party or established by a public authority. And we are addressing practices related to the early obsolescence of goods, including planned obsolescence. We want to prohibit the omission of information about a feature of a product that has been introduced to limit the durability. And furthermore, a seller should not sell a smartphone to a consumer that will get slower from software updates without telling them. You know that we are confronted many times with the upgrading of your software in the smartphone, but we need to know the consequence of this. And so it's an important information. Of course, products themselves must be sustainable. And this is why the Commission also published a parallel proposal for an eco-design regulation for sustainable products to gradually introduce product design requirements. We also need to get real about the need to have products that last longer and to repair them. Later this year, the Commission will put forward an initiative to establish a right to repair for European consumers, because it's a set of rules, it's not just with one legislative initiative. And the public consultation again for this initiative ended on the 5th of April 2022, and we are now analyzing the response. The objective of the initiative is to encourage the use of goods for a longer time, more defective goods being repaired and more second-hand goods being purchased. It's very important to do that because we try to go to a more sustainable world, a more sustainable economy. It's very important to work with the supply side, with all the businesses. But of course, it's very important to work with the consumers, because the consumers are spending more than 52–53% of the total GDP of the European Union. So if you don't take the consumer on board, you don't have any chance to reach the goal of a real green transition and a real climate neutrality in 2050.
Absolutely, thank you. And again, for a very comprehensive reply, and I can tell you that early and planned and bringing an end to planned obsolescence and really boosting visibility around the right to repairability is something very close to my heart. I think it's something that is less well known, less visible than recycling, say, for the consumer, and it is such a critical part of them being informed and, as you say, of them being empowered in the green transition. A last question, if I may. Now, many of the Commission's recent legislative initiatives are aimed at ensuring an open and a contestable digital market. So if you had to pinpoint the role that consumer organisations can play in facilitating this process even before the new laws come into effect, what would you propose?
But we try to work all the time with the consumer organisations, and certainly with the organisation at the urban level, BEUC, when we have to discuss about one of another proposal. And the proposal of the Commission on the Digital Markets Act is indeed one of the key legislative initiatives under the European Digital Strategy of March 2020, and among the first ones where there is a political agreement. This reflects its political importance as part of the Commission's efforts to make the market in the digital sector fairer, more open and contestable. The Digital Markets Act aims to increase this fairness by imposing certain ex-ante requirements on gatekeepers, that is, providers of core platform services in the digital sector, who play, you know, a gatekeeping role in certain digital markets. These are all very necessary developments, considering the rapid pace of change in digital markets. The requirements of gatekeepers will ensure fairness for respect to business users of the core platform service in question, but they will also lead to benefits for consumers due to greater competition and increased consumer choice. In the meantime, voluntary commitments again from companies are already making a big difference to improve the protection of consumers in the digital environment. These commitments allow us to reach results already before the legislation is catching up with these new developments, and they will continue to play an important role, because it's possible to go further than the actual legislation and to prepare the next one. So I want to make the product safety pledge bigger and better with the wider support and creative ideas. I was very pleased to follow the intense discussions during the first annual digital event and during the Consumer Summit again earlier this year on the extension of the product safety pledge. And I've tried to ask to all the member states to come with new companies able to take part in such a pledge. We will continue these discussions and reflection and also assess how could consumer organizations contribute to our shared objective. Consumer organizations, in fact, in any case, have a vital role to play by monitoring the situation, collecting feedback and experiences from consumers, and sharing the information with the Commission. In addition to the Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act, the Commission committed in the consumer agenda to analyze whether any further legislative or non-legislative action is necessary to ensure more online fairness. Several steps have already been taken, and firstly, the Commission is gathering evidence on emerging unfair practices in the digital environment, and we have contracted a behavioral study that examines the prevalence of impact of unfair practices such as dark patterns and manipulative personalization. The results of the study are due in spring 2022, so it's very soon. Secondly, the Commission has delivered and published new guidance documents on key consumer law instruments: Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, Consumer Rights Directive, or Price Indication Directive at the end of last year, 2021. The guidance include updated interpretations and case law examples regarding important online fairness topics such as, again, consumer reviews, transparency of search results, obligations for online marketplace, influencer marketing, dark patterns, consumer lock-in, and more. Finally, the Commission will soon launch broader reflections on possible components of future initiatives, and we will aim to gather ideas from a wide range of stakeholders, and we count on the involvement and active contribution of, again, the consumer organization in this new work strand. And we are looking forward to the exchange of views about that. I will say that it's not only in the preparation of new legislation that is very important to receive feedback from the consumer organizations. It's also very important to continue to work to them when we have a concrete issue or concrete problems. I want just to mention, to conclude, the long discussions that we have had with the consumer organization about the package travel directive during the pandemic. You know that we have had many cancellations of flights, many cancellations of travels, and it was very important to put together all the stakeholders, not only the consumer organization, the industry, the tour operators, the airlines company, to see how it's possible to try to solve the issue and not just to discuss separately with one and the other. And we'll continue. And you have seen that in Strasbourg in the Consumer Summit. We try to put together all the actors, not to have separate discussions with the different partners, but to try to reach the same goals together. And that's the main issue. And the reason why a very good involvement of the consumer organization is very important, but some voluntary commitments coming from the businesses is also very important. And at the end, of course, on such a basis, if it's needed, we propose some legislations. And thanks for this opportunity to present to you some proposals of new legislative instruments that we have put on the table in the last weeks or months, but also some that we are preparing for the next months.
Thank you. And thank you also just for coming back there and so clearly stressing the importance of getting all of those different stakeholders around the table, because as you well know, at the heart of the Consumer Empowerment Project, and I'm just reading because they are very specific words, is really to create a trusted environment for open and constructive dialogue between all those relevant stakeholders. So thank you for circling back to that. It really has been a pleasure to see you again. I hope that you might be able to catch some of the event when it takes place next week, and good luck with, well, this plethora of work that you have on your plate. Thank you so very much for being.
Thank you very much.